Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart, and welcome to a Flames of War themed video, and the first one for a while. I think it was about 5 months ago in my hobby plans for the year. I mentioned that Flames of War was going to be a big part of the channel this year, and then I think it was almost a month before that I did my last project vlog for my US Airborne Force, which has still got probably a day's worth of work to finish it off. But this isn't project vlog number 7 for that particular army. This is for something new. I recently bought my ticket to CrackCon 4, which is hosted by 4 YouTubers who run the Plastic Crack podcast, which is on Monday nights at 8 o'clock in the UK. And do check out their channels. They take it in turns to host the podcast itself. That's Seventh Son, Miniature Wargaming Warriors, Boots on the Table with Dom, and On Point HQ. The podcast itself covers absolutely any gaming. There's a lot of historical gaming on there, but quite a lot of fantasy and things find their way on that as well. Now, CrackCon 4, a broadside of crack, is unsurprisingly the 4th iteration of their mini convention, and it's hosted at Boards and Swords Hobbies in Derby. And basically, I think this time round around 50 gamers will be taking over the place, and there's a mixture of games hosted, all very, very relaxed, no competitions or anything like that. As I said, mostly historical based stuff, but there will be some fantasy things as well. And I've signed up to play in a 4-way game of Flames of War. So the 4 of us who are playing: Benjamin, Alad, who I've mentioned before on my Flames of War videos, and of course Dan, my mate, who hosts the Out of the Frying Pan podcast with me, and also now the Hobby Hour, which you can find on this channel, agreed a theatre fairly quickly, and we decided to go for North Africa, so we thought it would be a little bit of fun to do something different. I cheekily mentioned that I could probably do a really, really large army, 150 points or more, and we decided to have a really, really big game where we had 150 points each, though we're not going to squeeze it all on the table at one point. Now, I've had some North African stuff for a while, including the Tobruk starter set with the British and the Italians, and I bought a few extra things in the past to add to it as well. So I have some 6-pounders and some 17-pounders as well, and I picked up a 3-inch mortar platoon, and on eBay at the time they were out of stock with Battlefront, I found some British North African Rifle Company. And then a short while after that, the Churchill's King's Force was an absolute snip on Amazon, and I remember picking that up as well. And I'd also already treated myself to the North African compilation book, so it's been sitting around waiting for me to do something with it for a while. So while I was away on holiday, I had the North Africa digital copy on my iPad, and I had Forces to keep me company in the evenings with a glass of wine or two, and I knocked up a couple of 150-point lists and chatted with Benjamin, who is my partner in crime on the Allies side. Now, the lists are very much aimed for a big, fun, laid-back game, and we're going to fudge things if we need to make sure that we have some fun, really. This isn't designed to be a tournament game, so I'm not going to go into the list in too much detail, but I'm just going to kind of cover some of the things I may need. But essentially it boils down into a Sherman armoured squadron with some Crusaders and some Grants as well. I wanted to get enough variety of miniatures on the table as possible. And then also a motor company. It's been something I've wanted to do for a while, and it fits some of the miniatures that I already had. Then to top it off, I wanted to get some Churchills in, so I added them in support alongside some 17-pounders. As I already mentioned, at the time I picked up those initial bits, a lot of the mid-war British stuff was out of stock, at least the infantry was. You could always get hold of tanks. So I looked at the bits I picked up on eBay, and they were all pretty much the same 5 sculpts repeated. And I needed some Vickers machine guns as well, so I picked up a set of Motor Company because it'll be what I needed, and then I picked up the set with the LMGs and the 3-inch mortars as one platoon, or one section, sorry. So I just thought that's what I needed. If it means I don't use some of the initial bits I've got, then so be it. And then of course, being the kind of person that likes to always buy the tokens and the dice, I had to do that as well. So now I have a loose plan. I have all the miniatures I need. I have all the rules I need. I have my list, at least for now. That may well change between now and October.
So the next thing to do is start sort of planning my force in terms of building and painting it. I've got plenty of time to do it, so I'm not going to rush ahead and try and do it all in one go. However, I do have a lot of other projects on, and I want to make sure that it's a reasonable amount of time I spend on each thing. So what I decided to start with was do a bit of a painting test and work out how I was going to paint my infantry. So I set about assembling a stand. I went for one of the HQ stands with just the 3 miniatures on. I had a pretty good idea of how I was going to go about the paint scheme. I wanted to make sure that I used the reference material that Battlefront do for Flames of War. They have an excellent publication called Colours of War, which sets out all the different colours for, I say all, a good variety of different colours for the different armies and forces in the different theatres, and uses Vallejo paints as the reference, so it's very, very easy to then go and pick up your model colour or your model air, etc., and get what you need. So I had a quick flick through the relevant pages, found the page with the British infantry on, and had a little think about how I wanted to approach it. Now I know that a lot of you that follow the channel already will know that I like to use contrast paints or speed paints as a way of base coating, and I wanted to see if I could use that in this scheme, but also stick true to some of the colours that were suggested, and I had a pretty good idea how to do that. So for the rest of this video, it's going to turn into a bit of a painting tutorial now for my test stand for the infantry, and then you guys can give me some feedback and let me know what you think. So you'll know that I often start with a zenithal highlight over the black prime that I do, and then work up from contrast colours, but I wanted to make this slightly different. So I decided that as the base colour is so light anyway, I would almost do a zenithal with that and then work from there. So first up, I started with dark sand, which is the base colour recommended for the uniform. I put this in the airbrush, thinned about 50% with water, and then kind of did my zenithal from there. And it was quite a heavy zenithal. I wanted to make sure that there wasn't too much black, but I did leave it in the undercuts because it would help with some natural shadow. Then after this, I used a 50-50 mix of Skeleton Horde and medium, so it's nice and thin and didn't pull too much, just to go all over the main uniform areas. And this really acts a bit like a glaze or a wash, so it slightly toned down the Iraqi skin, but also in the recesses gives me some shadows and works the way contrast did. I just didn't want to make it too rich, and that's why I decided to thin it down slightly. Now the webbing and the socks are quite hard to do as a base coat in a contrast style paint, but here I'm using some Agarash Dunes. The idea here is it will give me a nice heavier shade of which to use the recommended colours, which is the khaki and the Iraqi sand, to almost highlight on top afterwards. That way it gives it more of a sort of a layered look, rather than just the flat colour, which looks really good on miniatures at this scale, and you can see why that's recommended as the paint style, but it's not the way I paint. I like to have multiple layers of highlighting, but also using this is also still really, really simple and easy to follow. For the skin, I'm using some Vallejo Express colour, and this is Dwarf skin. And yes, I did say Dwarf skin. There is no R in the spelling. I don't know if that's deliberate or not. Now, the dark sand is a very, very light pale yellow, so this goes over quite well. And as they're in the sun and tanned, the slightly duller tone rather than sort of pale whiteness that my skin looks like most of the time actually works quite well. So I use contrast Black Legion just to paint in the boots. This is the more opaque of the two blacks that they do. You could just use standard black here. It really makes little difference at all. They're going to be dusted up with some weathering powders at the end anyway. Then I use the same colour to pick out the metal areas on the guns themselves. You want the metal to look blued, so rather than going in with a metallic paint, I'm using this same Black Legion. Now a spot of contrast gore grunter fur for the weapon stocks, and again, as the miniatures are base coated in this light sand colour, this just goes straight over. You don't need to paint anything beforehand, and it's a really quite pleasing process, and it does give you that little bit of natural shadow and highlight because of the way the contrast colour works. While I was waiting for those paints to dry before I could highlight any further, I've got some AK diorama terrains desert sand. I usually use the Vallejo version of this, but it wasn't available from the place I normally pick it up, and this was cheaper for the same amount, and I must say I'm very impressed with it. It's a little bit thinner in texture than the Vallejo version, which is very good with sand, so you get a smoother effect rather than the ridges that you get, or the brush marks that you get from the thicker versions, which is good for mud and things. But when you want it to look like sand that's sort of settled loosely, this is quite cool. So I'll probably stick with this product from now on. Now back to that original Iraqi sand base colour, which was what I used through the airbrush. And after I've applied the glaze and sort of glaze wash really of the contrast skeleton horde, I go back over and pick out the higher areas of all the uniform again, and then you get this sort of nice highlighted miniature. Very simply, you're only doing one level of line highlighting here. And now for some model colour dark sand, which is the colour recommended in the Colours of War book for the helmet. So it's just a slightly different tone of light whitish creamish yellow really, but it does give a little bit of point of difference using the slightly different tones, and it makes the helmet stand out a little bit. Now for some model colour khaki. This is the recommended colour for the socks. Now there was a part of the top of the sock roll which isn't very clearly defined on the miniature, and I was struggling to work out whether it was leg or whether it was sock. But when I came to paint the highlights in here, I decided it was sock, but painting these thin layers of paint over the skin colour didn't really make a lot of difference and just provided some shadow, so I rectified this at this stage. Now I didn't want the skin to look too pale, them being in the sun and all, so I went for model colour sunny skin tone, seemed to be the perfect colour. Now I'm being a little bit subtle here. I don't want to completely cover the dwarf skin. That seemed to be a nice colour anyway. I just wanted to accentuate noses, cheekbones, knuckles, that kind of thing. You can leave this stage and they still look pretty good as it is, because the way the contrast or speed paints or fast paints seem to work over the lighter colours, they do that job to a certain extent for you. Now using model colour stone grey, I'm going to be picking out the webbing just as a highlight really. That Agaras Dunes wasn't exactly the right colour, but it does provide a nice deeper shade of which to highlight over, which gives the uniform and the webbing that subtle difference in colour, because they can get very lost on these miniatures. Obviously they're supposed to be camouflaged to a certain extent, but when you're painting miniatures you also want the different areas to stand out as well. I think I picked up all of these paints as one set. I think it was the official Flames of War by Vallejo, but Flames of War paint set for British Desert. I've long since thrown away the box, but it probably explains why I have all the exact paints I needed already in my collection. I picked out the officer's cap badge with a little bit of Scale 75 Necro Gold, and then set about doing some very subtle highlights on the metal areas of the weapons using a pencil, a soft pencil. I've done this many times before, but I don't always do it this way, and it was mentioned in one video it was such a good technique, and I said yes, I've done it before, and I thought to myself, you know what, in my next video I'm going to show how easy it is to do. You do want to make sure you seal it afterwards because it will just rub off, but it gives you a really subtle dull metal look, which you get with kind of blued weapons rather than a sort of shiny silver look, and it's super easy. Now by this time the basing texture was dry and I didn't have any sepia wash, but they can often look a little bit warm and orangey anyway, so I thinned some more skeleton horde, probably 2 parts water to 1 part contrast, and just used that on the base. And the benefit of this as well is that it dries super quick. Washes can take ages to dry. Contrast, even though it is watered down, seemed to dry in about 5 minutes flat, which is perfect. Now rather than dry brush, I like to use pigments on my bases, and I used a mixture of 3 for this, and I tend to use this mix for sand a lot. So we've got a dark yellow ochre, and we have a light sienna, and we have green earth, which is an almost white colour really, with a slight sort of greenish tinge to it. And I find all 3 of those mixed in areas over a base just gives a nice bit of variation, making the ground look like sand, but also giving you a little bit of different tone there, so it doesn't look like one flat colour. So I just work it on the base dry, rub it into all of the crevices in the texture paint and blow the excess away. I also want to make sure that I get enough over the boots as well. No need to highlight boots when you do this, it makes them look dusty and dirty as they would do. And once you've blown it away, it doesn't seem to come off too much. You are taking the excess. Now you could use a fixer, some people prefer to do that. I like the really dry look, and using a fixative does change that, so do what you feel best. If you're going to go and varnish now or anything like that, it will completely obliterate what you're doing, so maybe leave it to the end. But don't be scared of leaving dry pigment on bases. If you're touching around the edge of the bases anyway, it doesn't really seem to come off. If you do carry your miniatures around in cases a lot and you find it's causing a mess, then you might find a different solution is better for you, but this doesn't seem to be an issue for me. Next up, I added some suitable desert style tufts. Now these are 4mm ones from War Painter Scenics, not to be confused with the War Paint figures. I usually use a lot of my smaller tufts for my 2mm ones. These are a slightly different brand. Very, very cool. I had them for another recent project, and I think I'll use them for this one. Then, as I always do, I just finished off the edge of the base with a black rim. I've talked about this a little bit on videos before. It's my preference. I think it just really frames the miniature. If it's got a rim on it, it's not part of the scenic bit for me. I do appreciate that that will stand out more on a table rather than something that's fully textured or has a colour which matches the theme a bit more. Obviously, this is one of those you do you type things, but I prefer a black rim. And there we are, and that's the finished test base, and I was happy enough with it to turn it into a bit of a mini tutorial within this video, so hopefully people who like that method can adapt it or maybe use something similar themselves. Now I plan on doing a few more videos in this series, but I'm not going to number them like I have done with previous project vlogs, because this leaves people waiting for the next one always, and I set myself goals and targets and things that I can't always achieve. But the plan will be to do a tutorial for painting tanks with a bit of a secondary video of the project showing some of the progress, probably with tanks and some of the terrain and things that I'm building for it as well. There will definitely be at least a third or maybe a fourth video as well, where I show off the completed army, talk a little bit about the progress, and maybe even discuss the game and things as well. So there's going to be a few in the series. I don't know how many yet, so do look out for some more. And I'm pretty sure the next one with the test paint for the tank and the look at some of the terrain I've got won't be too far off in the future.
Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it in the comments below. What direction would you take with the painting? Have you painted any British 8th Army yourself or anything else in North Africa, and what were your experiences from it? Are you new to Flames of War and this video's piqued your interest? It's definitely worth taking a look at. Some of the starter boxes and starter armies are really, really fantastic value, especially if you're used to Games Workshop sort of prices for things. They're very, very kind compared to some others. But anyway, I will leave you there. If you've enjoyed the video, please do consider giving us a like. If you've liked what's on the channel and you haven't already done so, please consider subscribing. Thank you very much. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.